Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Cedric Geffen. I'm the president of March of the Living Australia, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening to another of our many online events, all related to the two core pillars of our educational mission. Learning more about the Holocaust in Israel to ensure a better understanding of the past in order to create a better future for all. And tonight's session, our 8th event this year, will no doubt greatly add to this wonderful repertoire. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we work and live, and on which this online event is being hosted today. We pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you now to our guest of honor and presenter, Eitan Neishlos, who joins us today from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. At the age of 42, Eitan has established himself as a young leader in the Jewish world. He is the president and founder of investment house Neishlos Capital and its philanthropic arm, the Neishlos Foundation, which advocates for Israel, combats antisemitism, and provides Holocaust education. Eitan's story is one of a modern and innovative pioneering spirit. As a serial entrepreneur and forerunner in the fields of payment, fintech, and financial inclusion, he has led the drive to use new and disruptive technologies to help improve the way we do business around the world. With over 20 years of experience in Latin America, Southern Africa, Australia, and Israel, he has helped multiple companies grow and succeed with an emphasis on the importance of social responsibility. He has brought banking to the unbanked and utilized technology to make it easier for employees to get paid in a fairer and more accessible manner. For Eitan, business, technological progress, social impact, and philanthropy are inherently linked, underpinning his vision of a world where people and communities are empowered to create sustainable social impact and where the next generations step up and make a difference. With March of the Living Australia placing a greater emphasis on exposing young adults to the importance and relevance of joining us on our newly launched Young Adult March of the Living journey in 2023, and as our tagline states, going where history books can't, I couldn't think of anyone more qualified to talk to us this evening. And now, without further ado, and again, apologies for not having my camera on, it is over to Eitan. Thank you very much.
Cedric, thank you. Thank you to March of the Living Australian for your very warm introduction. I genuinely appreciate it. Friends, it's amazing to be virtually back here in Australia, speaking to all of you today. I've been asked to speak for approximately half an hour, and I look forward to answering any questions that you'll have afterwards regarding the video that Cedric just showed you, regarding my speech, regarding my foundation, my location here in Dubai. I'm an open book, and I'll be delighted to answer any questions that do come up. While I have started a new life here in the United Arab Emirates, an amazing, exciting new horizon of opportunity, Australia will always hold a dear place in my heart, both the warmth of the people and the values that underpin this great nation. And it is these values of tolerance and peace that I'll continue to march within my new life in the UAE, to spread these cherished principles and to educate the next generation to stand up for them. It was Elie Wiesel who said, indifference is the epitome of evil. The Holocaust is the ultimate expression of what happens when humans turn a blind eye to humanity, the depths of this very evil. The Nazis' systematic oppression and dehumanization of Jewish communities across Europe and beyond. Their cold-blooded, industrial annihilation of more than 6 million Jewish men, women, and children stands alone and unique as the greatest crime against humanity of the modern age, and perhaps for its sheer scale, of all time, the nations of the world stood silent. The vast majority of the neighbors and colleagues of the Jewish victims did nothing. Many more took an active role in the killing. And again today, when it comes to the preservation of the memory of the Holocaust and the victims, and the courageous legacy of the survivors, we face much more than indifference. We face an outspoken array of voices actively and deliberately seeking to trivialize, belittle, abuse, and outright deny the memory of the crimes of the Nazis and their collaborators. This is abhorrent. This is evil. As the young generation, the first generation to live without the survivors, these lessons of the past must not be condemned to the archives of history. They must stay with us and walk among us, so that we never forget the sacrifice of those who suffered and paid the ultimate price, so that we never forget the true pertinence of the oath, never again. Until now, we have, of course, been blessed with voices of the heroes, the survivors of the Holocaust. And while justice may be on our side, time is not. Today, I'm privileged to be leading my generation as we begin the process with fervor of passing on the torch of Holocaust remembrance and education. I was recently honored to be one of the leaders of March of the Living in Poland, with the torch of remembrance held high. This included a historical first, as I was joined in lighting the torch by a leading Emirati figure, His Excellency Ahmed Al-Mansouri, who built the first Holocaust gallery in the Arabic world. And he marched and stood side by side with me at Auschwitz. We have the responsibility, but we are not alone in making sure the voices of the survivors are heard for generations and generations to come. Such a task would have been unmanageable without the dedication and courage of the survivors telling their stories. And in this, we find incredible strength and encouragement. My own babushka Tamara survived because of the sacrifice of the Chodaseviches, a Christian family who hid her, and for this, together with their baby, they were murdered by the Nazis. When she was 11 years old, she was visiting a small village in present-day Belarus with her family. One day, her parents told her, "Today, you have to stay in bed." That day, the Jews of the village were taken to the edge of a nearby forest and were shot, victims of the Holocaust by bullets, in which 1.5 million Jews were murdered. Babushka Tamara, though, survived. She couldn't have done it on her own. She was taken in by the Chodasevich family, who today are commemorated at Yad Vashem as righteous amongst the nations. Babushka Tamara was later captured by the Nazis, landing up in a labor camp before escaping with some Russian soldiers. An incredible story, but she never spoke about it to me while she was still alive. I suppose it was too painful, too traumatic. We only now know what happened because shortly after she passed away, my mother discovered her memoirs in a shoebox. My mother passed the shoebox of memories, of testimony to me, and I learned more of the horrors she endured. The shoebox has traveled with me from Australia to Israel, to the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, to Poland when I led March of the Living. And now it is still with me in my new home here in the United Arab Emirates. I'm so grateful that she had the chance to tell her story. but I wish that she had been able to share it in its entirety with the world while she was alive. And it's because of her story that I understand the unique responsibility that my generation, the third generation, has to keep the flame of Holocaust memory alive. It's inspired me, and I hope it can inspire others. We cannot take it for granted that people will continue to understand the Holocaust and its significance. Through the pandemic, for example, we have seen anti-vaxxers protesting around the world, perversely comparing themselves to Jewish victims of the Nazis. This trivialization of the Holocaust is a major threat and can only be combated through robust educational messages. And it is in the UAE and the Arab world in general where I'm taking the lessons of the Holocaust. Having worked with Courage to Care and B'nai B'rith in Australia, educating hundreds of thousands of non-Jews about those dark days, it is now time for my next challenge. How do we inculcate new generation of upstanders for tolerance, peace, and acceptance? I've already found incredible partners in the Gulf, working together with my brother, His Excellency Ahmed Al-Mansouri. We plan to revolutionize the field of Holocaust education in the Gulf. I have found true open-mindedness and Abrahamic hospitality in my new home, a culture and indeed a leadership which is fostering tolerance and peace. What does the Abraham Accords mean? Does it mean that all the problems in the Middle East have been solved? Far from it. But what the Abraham Accords means is that for the first time in perhaps 3 generations, there is a real opportunity for everyday people to make a difference in this region. This difference can be seen in business, in innovation, in how we tackle the most pressing issues like climate change, water sustainability, food security. This difference can be seen in education, how we raise our children in an atmosphere of respect and mutual understanding. It can be seen in how we discuss history, understanding the narratives of the other, hearing voices that we simply haven't been able to hear and engage with for nearly a century. There are lessons that we all must learn. This is never more true than when it comes to Holocaust education. I'm honored to be working with Ahmed Al-Mansouri, who opened and developed the first Holocaust gallery, as mentioned, in the Arabic and Muslim world. We are embarking on projects together that highlight the Holocaust as the greatest crime against humanity in history, and as the ultimate lesson of where cruelty and hatred can lead, and therefore the need for dialogue, cooperation, and genuine partnership. Not just a partnership because it looks good on our social responsibility forms, but a true and deep partnership rooted in friendship from which we can learn and grow together. The bravery of the Israeli, American, and United Arab Emirates leadership in coming together to forge this new path for the region has proven to be beyond party politics and represents perhaps one of the greatest processes in bringing peace in the Middle East. When it comes to the world of business and finance, the potential opened up by these new agreements in the United Arab Emirates and across the Gulf, in Bahrain, in Morocco, represents the opportunity to build long-lasting partnerships and truly promote economic growth for the benefit of all peoples. The greatest answer to those who wish us to fail is not just to succeed, but to succeed together. The Accords have brought not just peace, but true progress and tangible prosperity, and so much more possibility. In the Jewish faith, we have a concept that a good name is better than a good scent. A good scent may be enjoyed by those in the room. It perhaps maybe will even travel over to the next house, maybe even a street away, but all the time it grows weaker until eventually it dissipates. A good name, however, not only can it last beyond time and space, it grows stronger and carries more force and more appreciation. The Abraham Accords have the potential to do just that, to create an atmosphere that will long outlast its immediate vicinity and the current time period. It is an atmosphere of hope that is spread far beyond its borders. And it is this atmosphere which must be nurtured with educational programs such as March of the Living. A unique challenge for Holocaust education in the digital era is that our children have grown up online, are inundated with social media, and for the past 2 years have been attending classes on Zoom, as we are here together now. The coronavirus pandemic has illustrated just how important in-person learning is as well. The importance of seeing, feeling, and touching history up close in person. March of the Living is ahead of the curve each year, organizing student delegations to Auschwitz, giving the younger generations a chance to reckon with the totality of the Holocaust on a personal basis. These visits ensure that the memory of the survivors will forever endure and remain in the consciousness of young people. What's more, March of Living engages with significant numbers of non-Jews. This is vital to ensure that the memory of the Holocaust is not just limited to the Jewish community. Participants of all religions and nationalities join to promote a more tolerant world, to actively combat antisemitism, racism, and extremism. These efforts by March of the Living are leading the way to ensure that our children and their children will continue the work of Holocaust remembrance, to carry on the lessons of the Shoah in their daily lives, lessons of carnage and horror, but also ones of strength, courage, and the persistence of the Jewish people. Friends, today I pledge that we will always stand up against anti-Semitism. We will always stand up for the memory and the lessons of the Holocaust. We will nurture a new generation and generations to come who understand that in the face of evil, we cannot be bystanders. We must be upstanding, and we must be upstanding together. Thank you.
Thank you, Eitan. That was fantastic to hear your own personal story and the lead that you're playing in this revolution of picking up the torch of memory by the younger generation. I'm going to ask members of the audience, people who are who have listened to your talk, to raise any questions. I have a question here from Jack Kagan. Does the march invite non-Jews, people who are in a position to assist with carrying the message of the Holocaust? For example, newspaper correspondents or politicians. The answer to that, Jack, is most definitely yes. And we open our doors and our arms, and we embrace anyone and everyone to come on this journey. This is a journey for everyone, and as Eitan quite rightly said, it is more important for us to include as many people of all faiths and all backgrounds to the reality of and to walk down those paths together with us and with the survivors whilst they can. But what I'm going to ask is, Eitan, if you could possibly elaborate, there's a request here, can you possibly elaborate on Holocaust education that has already taken place in the UAE and or other Muslim countries or is scheduled to take place? So in addition to just opening, and it's not just, this is a major step, but in addition to the opening of the first ever museum about the Holocaust by His Excellency that you mentioned earlier, what else is taking place with regards to Holocaust education in the Arab world?
So thank you for the question. It's very early stages. And it's linked, in my opinion, to the Abrahamic Accords and to the sentiment of peace in the region. With that sentiment, we're seeing a lot of progress and change. For example, in Saudi Arabia now, they are removing a lot of the anti-Semitic or perceived anti-Semitic tropes that would be found in the textbooks there. This is a stepping stone for Holocaust education. Of course, in some other countries in the Gulf, we're already more ahead of that. My foundation, the Neishlos Foundation, is looking to initiate some programs, both here in the UAE and in Morocco, that I pray we will be able to announce later in the year. I will be visiting Morocco, attending the Jerusalem Post Conference, and if we're in a position at that time, we will be making announcements. We're also hopeful to be promoting a very important event for Kristallnacht here in the United Arab Emirates, and together with that, I also want to be able to make some announcements around Holocaust education. There is much to be done, but I have to say that His Excellency Ahmed al-Mansouri, who really has become a dear friend of mine, because as I mentioned, we shared this absolutely remarkable experience in Auschwitz together. Although he doesn't like me to say it, I have to say that he is a visionary, because what he has done is opened the Crossroads of Civilizations Museum prior to the Abrahamic Accords. And when one visits this museum, it's multicultural. It has different areas. It has things which are very personal to Ahmed. There is a section about pearls because his family were pearl traders, and it's very interesting. And as you progress through this, you start to enter other zones, Islamic zones, Christian zones, Jewish zones, a hybrid of all of these. You start to see, even in the Arab zones, how Jews used to live hundreds of years ago here, and their story of how they left this region. And eventually, he took me to a Holocaust section, which is very remarkable. And he tells many stories there. And he also tells, importantly, stories of Muslim righteous amongst the nations. I really think that the museum, this particular museum, with pioneers like Ahmed, with people like myself now relocating to Dubai, we are very well positioned to launch significant programs, but we are yet to do a full penetration. Much of the like of what Courage to Care has done in Australia, where I used to chair Courage to Care, on Ambassador at Large for Courage to Care, and they successfully, together with Holocaust survivors, managed to educate through meaningful programs over 200,000 young adults in Australia. I'm ambitious to do something similar here in the United Arab Emirates.
Fantastic, thank you. As far as the museum that His Excellency has opened, is that fully operational? Is that open to visitors to Dubai? Are people attending? What's the through traffic?
Absolutely. This is a real museum and a remarkable one. And I'm hopeful to work actually together with Ahmed to try and elevate the Holocaust Gallery into a full-fledged museum. But the Crossroads of Civilization concept is a museum. It's open. Ahmed would be delighted to have everyone in this audience here. If you're ever in Australia, feel free to
Ever in Dubai.
reach out to me. Oh, sorry. If you're ever in, yeah, I'm feeling so comfortable. I feel like I'm in Sydney again. If you're ever in Dubai, please reach out to me either through Cedric or directly, and we will make arrangements for you to hopefully meet Ahmed and to come and see the museum. You know, it touches on so many things. It's remarkable, even if something that was very personal to me, because I have a production company and I'm producing important stories about historical leaders, whether it's Yitzhak Rabin, working closely with the family, or I recently signed on Sugihara, working very closely with Nobuki Sugihara, his father, who's recognized as righteous amongst the nations. You know, when I was walking through the museum, I couldn't believe that there was even a section dedicated to Yitzhak Rabin with original letters of his handwriting. So not only is Ahmed showing the coexistence of our different faiths, he's also covering contemporary issues, and he's doing it with real, genuine artifacts. It's truly fascinating. I hope I've done a good job to promote it, because I really believe that it's a must-see.
Fantastic. Is there anyone in the audience, you might not have written your question, but if anyone has a question, if you can just raise your hand or give us an indication that you'd like to ask a question, because if not, I've got a few more in my pocket that I'm going to throw at Eitan. So, but I would like to give everybody else a chance. So is anyone out there who has a question that they want to ask Eitan at this stage? Eitan, I'm going to then jump in and ask you the following. So obviously your moment of understanding your role with regards to furthering education about the Holocaust and the lessons from the Holocaust, et cetera, came about through the exposure to your grandmother's story. What was your scenario before that, prior to understanding what your grandmother had been through? In other words, what exposure did you have before that? Was this a sort of a eureka moment? How did this grow upon you so that you now are so deeply embedded into this topic?
I think it's an excellent question. My first eureka moment was actually as a very young man. I was probably around Bar Mitzvah when I visited the Holocaust Museum in South Africa. And I think it was the first time I heard the words never forget, or at least it was a eureka moment when I actually felt the importance of those two words. And post that, I became very conscious about Judaism, very conscious about Israel, got very engaged in Jewish youth movements and so on. And I would ask my grandparents a few questions, but nothing more than that. I don't know if it is because it was difficult for them. Maybe it was difficult for me to ask, or maybe I was too young at the time. But it's probably a little bit of everything. I was very proud, though, as a Jew and my contribution. However, if I'm brutally honest, I think I only really became alive to the true issues of what all of my grandparents faced after their deaths. And maybe I regret that somewhat, although I did do enough to plant the seed, and they did enough for me to plant that seed. And I did speak about it in my speech, but I can get into it in a little bit more detail. I was actually invited, I think it was just before COVID, by the Jewish Board of Deputies in New South Wales and in Queensland to give a speech, because it was on Yom HaShoah Day, and it was a Russian angle, and with the Russian heritage in my family, it was appropriate for me to speak. That triggered me to go to my mother and ask for more information than what I'd actually had. And that's where my mother sort of came out of sort of a remnants of a shoebox and documents and all sorts of things, and tried to study it. Very difficult, because I think for my mother's generation, it's extremely emotional, because she did hear everything firsthand from my late grandmother, and these things hurt. So it's difficult for her to articulate, it's difficult to translate. It's very challenging, but over a period of actually a few months, I got just enough for the purpose of the speech, but I kept on with the journey, and over a period of a few months, I went through a translation of her memoirs. I discovered that I didn't know while she was alive that she had actually given a Spielberg interview. But what was very interesting about the Spielberg interview was that she only told half the story. She told the story of the Chodeseviches, and she didn't do it for herself. She did it for their honor, to honor them. And she spent many, many years ensuring that they commemorated at Yad Vashem. And she was, when I observe her in that interview, somewhat careful about what she's saying, because still she was concerned about sharing her whole story with the world. Still, she was concerned about naming other people that saved her. It was not just the Chodeseviches. And I'm going to respect her privacy and confidentiality, but I'm highlighting here an issue that for various reasons, people don't talk. And my generation don't ask. And I got a light bulb moment with the shoebox, but I think, that light just grew and grew and grew in the coming months. And I'm thankful to March of the Living, because it's also because of March of the Living that I went into a deeper analysis and a deeper study. What I want to urge the second and third generation. The second generation, if you have stories of your parents, or you don't, if you have children that should know about the stories, if you are a grandchild, if you are a third generation, don't wait for something like in my case. It was huge. I was invited to lead the march, and so I really got into it. Don't wait for that moment for your eureka. Really encourage everyone to draw down, get the information, share it with organizations. Yad Vashem took me on a personal tour. The chairman, Danny, who's a remarkable man, absolutely remarkable. He speaks up for many communities in Israel. He was the consul general in New York for and on behalf of Israel, which is the largest diplomatic mission of Israel, and I was chairman of Yad Vashem. He took me into the archives room where there's over 200 million documents. And I cannot emphasize enough what can be achieved with that information. Personally, he presented me with a dossier of all of information on my father's side. Unbeknown to us, what certain members of the family were going through, things that my father didn't know, that I didn't know. The information is sitting there, but we have to feed the information in, and there's a lot that can be done with it. So please, with or without a eureka moment, please get involved, and please adopt the values that our ancestors left us. They perished because of their identity, and they didn't give up their identity. The leadership in Israel always reminds me, the state of Israel protects us. but so does our Jewish values. And I think it's incumbent on my generation to ensure that we inherit those values and that we pursue them. You know, dor vador is what they say, from generation to generation. That is our survival story.
Thank you.
I did notice that there's a question from Jack Kagan, which I'm not sure has been addressed. His question was, does the march invite non-Jews, people
Yes.
who are in a position to assist with carrying the message of the Holocaust, e.g. newspaper correspondents or politicians? So with your permission, I might address that.
Sure, go ahead.
I think first of all, the answer is a very strong yes.
Yeah.
I attended the march recently, and I was actually marching with the president of Poland. And who was side by side with me? There was, of course, Ahmed al-Mansouri, His Excellency. There was myself, a descendant of a Holocaust survivor. There was Nobuki Sugihara, a Japanese man, descendant of righteous amongst the nations. There was Mike Evans, one of the largest evangelists in the world. And there was Caroline, a descendant of a Nazi whose family brutally murdered Jews. Everyone came with a message. And we marched side by side with each other. And I worked very closely with March of the Living to ensure that we have this line of people marching together. I wasn't responsible for all of them, but for some of them. And the message was very loud and clear. Jews and non-Jews alike of all denominations, representing all of the world, are able to march together in coexistence. And I think that this was a very important message. And I think if a Jew and an Arab and a descendant of a Nazi who came with great humility are able to hold hands, then who can't hold hands in the world? That is the message. And of course, there was remarkable coverage. I have to take the opportunity to mention the leadership in March of the Living. Phyllis, our president, who stands up for us in Washington. Shmuel, who is our chairman based in Israel, who I consider a mentor. Revital, who does so much on the front lines and on the back. And they, together with others like Cedric and myself, who I've now opened up the chapter in the Gulf, we worked tirelessly. And there was great coverage. In fact, when I lit the torch of remembrance together with Ahmed al-Mansouri, and we both gave speeches, and I recited the Tanakh and he recited the Quran, that was televised globally and reached many news channels. I personally gave many interviews. Ahmed gave many interviews. Others gave many interviews. It is critical to include Jews and non-Jews alike. And one of my missions with the March of the Living in the Gulf is to identify future leaders that will adopt and inherit the Abrahamic Accords. And to that end, Holocaust education is imperative, and therefore we will be bringing them year on year to Auschwitz to march together with us.
Thanks, Eitan. Yeah, Jack, as I mentioned there, please let's talk tomorrow and we can elaborate on that even further. I'm going to, if no one else has another question, I'm going to raise one more, and I'm going to now turn to the topic of the younger generation. So you are, as I mentioned earlier, a 42-year-old, you're just beyond the Gen Y, from a cutoff point. You got to know what the term is, but ultimately the Gen Y, Gen Z, these are the future of our community. These are the future members, the future leaders of our community. Why, in your view, is it important for the younger generation, the Gen Ys and Gen Zs of our community, to pick up this torch of remembrance? Why is it important for them? How do they go about it? In what means do they go about it when they potentially are not in a situation where, like yourself, who, you're in a situation where you can dedicate a lot of your time and effort and money to this? But what can the individual 18 to 35-year-old do? What is incumbent on the 18 to 35-year-old today as far as that's concerned?
Well, don't know if this is good news, but I recently turned 43. and despite my age, and despite those generations, I prefer to group us into a collective and to call us Generation Chai.
Yep.
Because we can all be upstanding and we can all be living. Why? I feel very strongly that Jews around the world, including in Australia, have a duty to stand up. The reason they have this duty is for a few reasons. The state of Israel exists and thrives. The state of Israel has got young men and women fighting and defending us. They have our backs. Let's not be naive. Our lives are good around the world because of the existence of the state of Israel and its strength. So we have to ask ourselves, if soldiers in Israel have our backs, what are we going to do to have their backs? What are we going to do? This is one reason that I personally feel very strongly about standing up. The second reason is because what preceded the state of Israel, the Holocaust. Did 6 million Jews die in vain? They died, they starved, they got shot. How can we be blasé now in a comfort zone? How can we assume that history will never repeat itself? Surely we must be active participants in a better world and stand up. Now, if you agree with me that there is cause and reason to do something for those reasons, as I believe, then the question is, what can you do? And I actually had this debate in Australia, in my home there, with JNF Future, which is a wonderful organization. And Yossi Eshed, who's the Shaliach and a dear friend of mine, and a good friend to March of the Living. We were debating what young adults can do. Because Cedric talks about resources, and to be honest with you, he's right. Actually, I once spoke to 500 young adults in Australia, and I did match funding. I convinced them to give to lone soldiers in Israel. And so for every dollar they gave in a group of 500, I matched it with $1, and it was very successful and very expensive for me, but thank God. But the next question from the community, from the young adults was, well, what can we do beyond that? And so we came up with an amazing program, which I feel answers Cedric's question. We decided to aggregate all the young adults, Jewish young adults in Australia, and for each of them to give $18 a month. And $18 a month collectively can grow into a meaningful number. And so it shows the power of the collective. And on top of that, we made sure that it is sustainable, because I'm very interested in campaigns that either provide a strong social impact, like what Ahmed and I achieved at Auschwitz, or create sustainable annuity charitable income. And so this $18 a month collectively, month on month, which was pledged to Oem Rachok, which is an organization in Israel that takes young adults with autism, preps them, filters them, and preps those who are able to serve in the intelligence units of the IDF. They get paid for their service in the IDF. They then get jobs. And so this campaign of the collective grows and grows and grows in multiples. It gets paid forward so many times. So there are ways, but start with a meaningful action. And I urge anyone who has not attended Auschwitz, the march, it's a life-changing event. I'm not diluting from whatever someone feels for their people, for their country, but I promise you, if you haven't attended, there will be a life-changing event there. There will be inspiration, and we all need that inspiration. And when you see, as we spoke earlier, Jews and non-Jews marching together on such sacred ground, you will start to understand and appreciate even more that we have friends and that we have coexistence and that we have more work to do, because there were only 25,000 righteous among the nations. And my question to you is, what if there was 250,000? What if there was 2.5 million? Would the Holocaust have happened? The Holocaust would have not happened for two reasons. If we had a state of Israel and if we had more upstanders. So let's work together for those two causes. That's what my foundation does. And if there's anything that I can do to assist in that, I'll be more than grateful.
Thank you, Eitan. That was a great answer, and I appreciate that. Look, this discussion could carry on for much longer, but all things come to an end. And on behalf of everyone here tonight, I want to thank Eitan profusely for sharing with us some amazing insights and thoughts and ideas and concepts. And I sincerely hope that Eitan's example will serve as a call to action to many younger members of our community, and look forward to increased engagement of Gen Y, Gen Z, Gen Chi, cohorts in Holocaust memorialization, combating antisemitism and other forms of prejudice, and many other important community endeavors. Before bringing the evening to a close, I'd also like to mention that it is our custom after each event like this to seek your feedback via email in an attempt to continuously improve and grow the knowledge base. So if you have any topics or presenters that you would like us to include, please let us know, care of the surveys that you'll receive via email. Also, a reminder that our next event will take place in 2 weeks' time, on Sunday, the 24th of July, with a presentation on the history of YIVO, as you see there, the Institute for Jewish Research, and the Edward Blank YIVO Vilna Online Collections Project. And we urge you to go onto our website and register under the upcoming events section. And finally, for those of you who may be interested in joining us for our return to live March of the Living Journeys, we are going to be back in 2023. It's going to be a bumper delegation, because we'll be marking 80 years since the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, 75 years to Israel's independence, and 35 years of March of the Living. So save the dates, 17th of April to about the 1st of May. And for more details or to express your interest, you can either go to our website, motl.com.au, or you can scan the QR code that's up on the screen at the moment. Thanks once again to Eitan. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eitan. Bye.